You could almost taste the dust in the air, the kind that settles in your throat and coats your skin until you feel part of the land itself. That was Montana in late October. The wind sharp and restless as the people gathered at the livestock auction yard. They leaned against splintered rails, boots caked in years of mud, waiting for a bargain or a miracle, never sure which would come first. On the far edge of the pen, among the battered cattle and skittish ponies, lay something that barely resembled hope. Black as a thundercloud, the stallion was all jutting bones and cracked hooves, his ribs a map of hunger, his mane tangled with straw and burrs. Flies hovered over the sores on his flanks. His eyes, if you bothered to look, seemed almost hollow, emptied by everything he'd endured. Nobody did. The auctioneer, a man named Chet with nicotine fingers and a voice like gravel, tapped the clipboard and shook his head. Lot 48, no papers, he called out, not even bothering to bang the gavel. Who'll start me? No papers, no lineage, not much meat neither. Might as well dig the grave now. The crowd gave a lazy chuckle. Some turned away. Others just looked through the horse, as if he was already gone. But Rowan Hale was there, just past the crowd, one hand stuffed deep in his worn-out jeans, the other fiddling with a callus on his thumb. He was only 21, but the lines on his face made him seem older. The jacket he wore was patched so many times, the original color had long disappeared, and his boots, well, they'd seen better days, maybe even better decades. Still, Rowan's gaze never left the stallion. He saw beyond the matted coat, beyond the ragged breaths, beyond the way the horse's legs trembled just standing. He saw a creature who had refused to lie down and die, even when the world decided he should. The bidding began, if you could call it that. Start at 5? 3? Anybody? Chet scanned the yard, eyes half-lidded, ready to move on. Rowan felt something stir in his chest, a mix of pity, stubbornness, and something he hadn't felt in a while. Hope. He raised his hand. $1, Rowan called out, his voice steady, though he knew what was coming. The laughter was immediate. You trying to buy a ghost, kid? Someone shouted. Better off with a bag out of bones from the diner? Rowan just shrugged, his cheeks burning, but he didn't lower his hand. $1, he repeated, louder this time. Even the auctioneer gave him a look of disbelief. Chet spat on the ground, muttered, Hell, cheaper than the dog food factory, and nodded. Sold, if no one else is that crazy. He slammed the gavel, and that was it. There were no cheers, no one clapped, just the scrape of boots and the hiss of the wind, and somewhere, Rowan thought, the faintest sound, a soft snort from the black horse. As if he understood what had just happened, Rowan walked over, the weight of every eye pressing down on him. Up close, the horse smelled of fear and old hay, but also something cleaner, like rain after fire. The animal didn't flinch as Rowan knelt and rested a hand on his neck. Hey, buddy, Rowan murmured. Name's Rowan. Guess we're both the talk of the town now. The stallion blinked, too weak to even shudder, but in that split second, Rowan felt a connection. Not a miracle, not a promise. Just a silent agreement. We keep going, you and me. Rowan glanced at the crowd. I'll take him, he said. I got him. He wasn't sure what he'd expected. Applause? Sympathy? But mostly there was just shaking heads, a few sneers, and a single hard truth. He was on his own. He led Hollow. He'd already given him the name in his mind for those empty eyes. Out of the yard. There was no trailer, no truck, just 5 miles of frostbitten dirt road between the auction and home. Rowan wrapped an old lead rope around his wrist, feeling the rough fibers dig into his skin as he tugged gently. The road home wasn't much of a road at all. Gravel that rattled under every step. Ditches crusted with the season's first ice. The occasional crow picking at the remains of summer. It was late afternoon, but the Montana sun had already slipped behind the hills, leaving the world in a blue-gray hush. Hollow stumbled after the first half-mile, his legs buckling as if he'd lost the memory of how to walk. Rowan caught him, arms wrapped around the bony chest, lifting more than guiding. "Come on, boy. Not much farther," Rowan said, though he was lying, and they both knew it. A truck sped past, sending up a spray of stones and laughter from the window. "Should have left him for the coyotes," someone jeered, but Rowan kept moving, the chill biting through his jacket. Every 100 yards felt like a mile. Sometimes Hollow would stop completely, swaying in the freezing air, and Rowan would lean in, whispering encouragement, fingers pressed to the cold, trembling flesh. One step, that's all. One step, then another. It became a rhythm, a chant, until the barn finally appeared on the horizon, a half-collapsed heap of timber and rusted tin. By the time they reached it, night had already settled. Rowan pushed open the warped door, guiding Hollow inside. There was no real stall, just a corner with some old straw and a battered feed bucket. Rowan eased Hollow down, covering him with the last burlap sack he owned. There was no heat. The wind rattled the boards, and the darkness felt alive, wrapping around them both. Rowan curled up beside the horse, one hand resting on Hollow's neck. The animal was so still, Rowan kept checking for breath. He lay there for what felt like hours, shivering in the dark, wondering if he'd made the dumbest choice of his life. Maybe everyone was right. Maybe hope was just another way to lose. Then, in the dead quiet, Hollow let out the faintest snort, a tiny burst of air, almost defiant. Rowan grinned, despite everything. "Still here, huh?" he whispered. Outside, the stars blinked cold and bright, and for the first time in a long time, Rowan believed maybe, just maybe, he and Hollow were more than what the world saw. Morning broke in a pale shimmer over the Montana plains, turning the frost into a thin, sparkling sheet on the sagging barn roof. Rowan blinked awake, stiff and cold, his cheek pressed against the gritty boards. For a moment, he couldn't remember where he was, the unfamiliar ache in his body muddling his thoughts. But then he heard the soft, uneven breathing of Hollow beside him, felt the gentle rise and fall of the horse's gaunt ribs under his hand. Rowan pushed himself up, every muscle protesting. He looked over at Hollow, who still lay motionless, legs folded awkwardly, eyes half-lidded and weary. In the pale light, the stallion seemed more fragile than ever, a shadow stretched thin across the dirt floor. Rowan's heart twisted at the sight, but he forced a hopeful smile. "Morning, old man," he murmured, voice husky from sleep and cold. You made it through the night. That's got to count for something." There wasn't much to offer for breakfast. Rowan scavenged a handful of brittle hay from a crumbling bale and mixed it with what little sweet feed he'd found in an old plastic pail, scraping together the leftovers from the previous winter. He slid the bucket near Hollow's nose. The stallion sniffed at it, lips trembling, but he took a bite. Slow, uncertain, but he ate. Rowan let out a quiet breath. Maybe this gamble wasn't lost just yet. But the truth was harsh. There was no more feed, no more hay, and certainly no money. Rowan sat back on his haunches, mind racing through options. He'd have to figure that out later. For now, Hollow needed more than a few mouthfuls. He needed hope. Rowan shuffled out to the yard, breath steaming in the icy air. The world was still and quiet, except for the caw of distant crows and the groan of the wind. He walked to the fence, patched up with baling twine and ancient wire, staring down the dirt road that wound away toward town. 5 miles. It had felt endless last night. Now, it seemed even farther. Rowan returned to the barn, found an old blanket, and draped it over Hollow's back. The horse didn't flinch. Rowan knelt beside him, gently coaxing. "Come on, let's try standing." It took a while, too long for Rowan's comfort, but finally Hollow heaved himself up, legs trembling, nostrils flaring with the effort. For a moment he wobbled, and Rowan pressed his shoulder to Hollow's side, steadying him. Together they stood in the silent barn, a boy and his battered horse, united by nothing but stubbornness and the faintest trace of hope. With no truck, no trailer, and no help, Rowan knew there was only one way to get Hollow moving, to walk him step by step, back towards some kind of life. He tied the rope loosely around Hollow's neck, careful not to startle him, and let him out into the biting morning air. The road stretched ahead, lined with bare cottonwoods, their branches clawing at the gray sky. Frost crackled beneath Rowan's boots. Hollow hesitated at the threshold, head hanging low. Rowan glanced at him, voice soft. "I know you're tired. So am I. We just have to keep moving." They started down the road. The first few steps were slow, Hollow's hooves dragging in the dirt. Rowan walked close, hands steady on the rope. Every 100 yards, Hollow faltered. Once his legs buckled entirely, and he crumpled to his knees in the gravel. Rowan's heart lurched. He dropped to the ground beside Hollow, whispering encouragement, gently rubbing the horse's neck. "It's okay, bud. We'll rest here a minute. I'm not giving up on you." After a few breaths, Hollow struggled back to his feet. Rowan's muscles burned from supporting the horse's weight, but he refused to let go. Step by step, they carried on. Halfway to town, a pickup slowed alongside them. Rowan recognized the face behind the wheel. Mr. Daniels, a neighbor from 3 properties over, known for his sharp tongue and sharper opinions. The window rolled down, and Daniel squinted out, lips curled in a half smirk. "You dragging that thing all the way home, Rowan? Ought to save yourself the trouble. He won't last a week." Rowan straightened, brushing dust from his jeans. "He'll last," he said simply, refusing to let doubt seep into his voice. Daniel shook his head, muttered something under his breath, and drove off, tires spitting gravel. Rowan watched the truck disappear, a familiar knot tightening in his stomach. He knew what people were saying. He'd heard them at the auction, seen the way they looked at Hollow, like trash left by the side of the road. But as the sun crept higher, glinting off distant mountains, Rowan pressed on. Hollow stumbled a second time, legs trembling so violently, Rowan thought the horse might collapse for good, but this time Hollow refused to fall. He wobbled, found his footing, and kept moving. Rowan felt an unexpected surge of pride. Maybe, if just maybe, Hollow understood what was happening, understood that someone finally cared whether he lived or died. By the time they reached the last stretch, Rowan's back ached. His hands were raw from the rope, and Hollow's sides heaved with exhaustion. They passed a cluster of houses. Their windows shuddered against the cold. Children watched from behind glass, their faces pressed to the panes, wide-eyed at the sight of the ragged horse and the stubborn young man who refused to leave him behind. The barn was in sight, leaning precariously against the winter wind. Rowan steered Hollow toward it, his legs nearly as unsteady as the horse's. Inside, he collapsed onto the hay-strewn floor, Hollow sinking down beside him with a low, grateful sigh. That night, Rowan lit an old kerosene lantern and sat beside Hollow. The barn was a drafty mess, holes in the roof, walls gaping where boards had rotted through, but it was shelter. Rowan tucked his jacket around his shoulders and leaned back against the wall. The silence was heavy, punctuated only by Hollow's breathing and the soft creak of the barn. Rowan felt exhaustion settling in, but he fought sleep, eyes fixed on the stallion. "You're not alone anymore," he whispered. "I'm right here. We're in this together." Hollow's ears flicked. Then, as if in answer, he let out a faint snort. Soft but sure. Rowan grinned in the dim light, feeling something shift in his chest. It wasn't victory, not yet, but it was a start. Through the cracks in the wall, Rowan watched the sky turn indigo. He thought about everything ahead. The feed he didn't have, the repairs the barn needed, the neighbors who would keep talking. But for the first time since he'd lost his uncle, Rowan felt like he had a reason to fight. Outside, the frost deepened, and the stars blinked into view, cold and distant. Inside, Rowan and Hollow, 2 forgotten souls, found the beginning of something neither of them could name. Hope, maybe, or just the simple stubbornness to survive. Rowan drifted off to sleep, one hand resting on Hollow's neck. Tomorrow would be hard. But tonight, they'd made it. Together. Morning lights spilled through the broken slats of the barn, painting thin gold lines across the battered boards. Rowan woke to the harsh bite of the cold, but he barely felt it anymore. the ache in his back, the rough straw itching at his skin. None of it mattered as much as Hollow. He rolled over and checked on the horse, half expecting the stallion to have given up in the night. But Hollow lifted his head at Rowan's movement, black eyes alert despite the fatigue. "Still with me, huh?" Rowan whispered, voice thick with relief. He reached out, rubbing the horse's forehead, feeling the warmth beneath that tangled, filthy mane. Rowan knew every minute Hollow kept fighting was a small victory, but each one came at a cost. Food was the first challenge. The next morning, Rowan rummaged through the barn and came up with little more than a handful of stale oats, some brittle hay, and a few carrots gone soft and limp. He fed Hollow what he could, apologizing quietly. "I know it's not much, buddy. I'll find more." But finding more meant facing the town. Rowan left Hollow with a bucket of water and hurried down the dirt road, hands shoved deep in his jacket. Frost crunched under his boots as he walked into Wesson's feed and supply, a cramped building where everyone knew everyone else's business. Rowan could feel the eyes on him before he even spoke. Mrs. Wesson stood behind the counter, arms crossed, lips pinched tight. "You here for something, Keys, Rowan?" she asked, skepticism heavy in her voice. He forced a polite smile. I need some feed. Hey, oats, just enough to get by a few days." She eyed him up and down, taking in his worn boots and the faded patch on his jeans. "You know the policy. No credit unless you got work." Rowan's cheeks burned. "I'll pay you back. Promise. She cut him off with a sigh, but there was a flicker of softness in her eyes. "You still taking care of your uncle's barn? Or is this for that horse people are talking about?" He hesitated. Lying never got him far in Wesson's. "Yeah, it's for him." She tapped her fingers on the counter, thinking. Finally, she reached under the register and pulled out a battered ledger. "1 week, Rowan. You pay me by next Friday, or I send Daniels to collect." He nodded gratefully. "Thank you, Mrs. Wesson, really." She slid him a sack of oats and a block of hay, heavier than anything he'd carried in months. "Don't make me regret this." Rowan carried the supplies home, breathless from the weight and from the sting of pride. When he arrived, Hollow perked up at the smell of real food, ears flicking forward for the first time since the auction. Rowan laughed, exhausted but joyful, as Hollow devoured the hay. The barn, though, was a disaster. The old stall walls sagged inward, nails jutting out like teeth. Rowan spent hours scavenging through the property for anything usable. Splintered lumber, rusted wire, even an old door that had fallen off its hinges years ago. His hands bled from the effort, but he pieced together a makeshift stall, hammering boards into place, patching gaps with barbed wire and determination. By nightfall, the stall looked rough, but it would keep Hollow safe from the wind. Rowan collapsed onto the ground, sweat freezing on his skin, and watched the horse settle into the new pen. For the first time, Hollow looked almost comfortable. That night, as the temperature dropped, Rowan lay awake thinking about what came next. He knew he couldn't do this alone forever. Still, when Hollow let out a quiet, grateful huff and leaned his head over the stall door to rest against Rowan's shoulder, the world felt a little less heavy. The next days were a blur of sacrifice. Rowan skipped meals to save what little he had for Hollow, his own stomach growling as he poured oats into the feed bucket. He pawned his old guitar, one of the last things his uncle had given him, to cover a sack of grain. He watched the neighbors watch him, whispering behind their hands, shaking their heads as if he were wasting his time on a lost cause. Rumors spread quickly in a small town. Rowan caught snippets every time he ventured out for supplies. "Boy's lost his mind, wasting what little he's got on that animal. I give it a week, maybe 2, before he buries them both." Still, he pressed on. In the evenings, he scoured YouTube on his battered phone, the screen spiderwebbed but still working. Tutorials on horse care, how to check for dehydration, how to give fluids when you couldn't afford a vet. He watched a video 3 times before working up the nerve to try it himself. Hands trembling, Rowan drew saline into a syringe and injected it just beneath Hollow's skin, talking softly the whole time. "It's okay. I know it stings. This'll help. Promise." The horse barely flinched. He just watched Rowan, those dark eyes never wavering. For every moment of doubt, there was a spark of something else. Trust, maybe, or just quiet endurance. Every night, after chores and patchwork repairs, Rowan would sit in the hay and watch the stars blink through holes in the barn roof. Hollow would settle beside him, sometimes laying his heavy head in Rowan's lap. Rowan found himself talking to the horse, telling him stories about the uncle who'd raised him, about the days when the barn was filled with laughter and hope. "You know," Rowan whispered one night, "they all think you're a mistake. Maybe I am too. But mistakes can change things if you give them a chance." Slowly, day by day, Hollow started to change. The sores along his flanks scabbed over and healed. His steps grew steadier. He lifted his head higher. And always, always he watched Rowan with an alertness that made something in the young man's chest ache with pride. The whispers around town never stopped. Some people pitied Rowan, others ridiculed him, but a few started to notice Hollow's transformation. Mrs. Wesson asked about him, and the kids who used to throw stones at the barn fence now stopped to watch, curious and a little in awe. "Look, Ma," one boy said, "the black horse is standing again." Rowan overheard and grinned, feeling that stubborn spark burn brighter. But it wasn't just the townsfolk who noticed. One afternoon, as Rowan scrubbed the mud from Hollow's legs, he caught the old mailman, Mr. Gibson, standing by the road, hands on his hips. "That horse is looking better," Gibson called. "You might just prove us all wrong, Rowan." Rowan didn't answer, but he felt the words settle into his bones. Maybe proving them wrong wasn't the point anymore. Maybe it was about proving something to himself and to Hollow. As autumn deepened, Rowan realized he had no choice but to keep sacrificing, keep fighting, and keep believing. He'd taken a gamble on Hollow, but every day the horse fought to stand. Every day he leaned his head over that stall door and watched Rowan with those dark, determined eyes. It felt a little less like a gamble and a little more like fate. Rowan lost track of how many days and nights he spent in the barn, fighting for every inch of Hollow's recovery. Time blurred into a rhythm of scraping together feed, scrounging for supplies, patching the roof each time the wind tried to rip it apart. The barn grew less drafty, the horse grew less hollow, and Rowan, despite the exhaustion etched into his face, began to stand a little straighter. One gray morning, with a cold drizzle tapping at the metal roof, Rowan was cleaning out Hollow's water trough. The barn smelled of damp earth and old hay, but beneath it lingered a new scent. Life, hope, and something like redemption. Hollow nickered softly, standing with his weight balanced and his mane beginning to regain a healthy sheen. Rowan felt an unfamiliar swell of pride every time he looked at the horse. He didn't hear the truck at first, old, battered, its muffler barely muting the engine's groan as it pulled up the gravel drive. Only when the barn cat darted under a pile of boards did Rowan notice the change in the air. He wiped his hands on his jeans, stepped to the door, and peered out into the gray morning. A rusted Chevy, blue once, but now mostly a patchwork of primer, an orange Montana dust, idled near the gate. Rowan's heart skipped. He'd seen that truck before, but not in years. Not since before Uncle Walt died, not since things began to fall apart. The driver's door swung open, and out climbed Elias Carter, tall and lean, his hair gone silver, his face creased with the stubbornness of a lifetime. He wore an oil-stained canvas jacket and boots that matched Rowan's for wear. For a moment, neither spoke. The drizzle pattered between them, blurring the years. Elias approached, his eyes darting to the barn and then to the shape of Hollow in the doorway. He froze, jaw working as if chewing on words too hard to swallow. "That's your uncle's horse?" Elias's voice was rough, incredulous, and a little broken. Rowan nodded slowly. "What's left of him? They called him Hollow at the auction. Nobody else wanted him?" Elias stepped closer, eyes widening as he took in the stallion's shape. The scars, the muscle returning to his shoulders, the fire slowly returning to his gaze. "I'll be damned. I thought he was lost after Walt died. There were stories, but I never saw proof." Rowan leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, wary and curious. "You knew my uncle bred him?" Elias let out a tired laugh. "Your uncle was a stubborn man. Always had a chip on his shoulder about those fancy registries. He wanted a horse that could run with the best, paper or not. Did you know he kept Hollow a secret? Bred him to challenge the whole system, but when the registry folks got wind, they blacklisted him. Made sure Hollow never had a chance. Erased him like he never existed." The words struck Rowan hard, but they explained so much. The hush in town, the way people talked about his uncle. The disdain for the horse. Why? What did Hollow ever do to them? Wasn't about the horse, kid. It was about the message. Elias's gaze turned distant, shadowed by old anger. Walt wanted to prove a horse didn't need a piece of paper to matter. The bigwigs at the breed registry board didn't like that. They shut him out. Hollow never raced. Never even got a number. Your uncle's heart broke over that. Rowan stared at Hollow, running a hand down the stallion's neck. All this time, I thought he was just unlucky. I never knew. Elias nodded, stepping into the barn, boots echoing on the boards. You picked the one horse in this valley who was born to make a point. But the price was heavy. Walt lost friends, lost business. People stopped coming around. He kept Hollow hidden after that. Most folks figured the horse died or ran off. Nobody wanted trouble. There was a long silence, only broken by Hollow's soft breathing and the rain against the tin roof. Rowan squared his shoulders. I don't care about papers. I just want to see him get another chance. Elias looked him over, something like pride flickering across his weathered face. You got your uncle's fire, I can see it. But let me give you some advice, Rowan. The folks that run those shows, those registries, they play for keeps. They don't forgive or forget easy. You challenge them. You better be ready for a fight. Rowan set his jaw, defiance stirring in his chest. Maybe it's time someone did. Elias snorted. That's what Walt said, right before everything went sideways. Be careful, boy. You've got guts, but you'll need more than that. He fished a faded envelope from his jacket pocket and placed it on a workbench near the door. I found this after your uncle's funeral. Tucked under a floorboard in the old tack room. Figured it was for you, but you weren't ready then. Maybe you are now. Rowan stared at the envelope, the handwriting unmistakable. Walt's, shaky but determined. He didn't open it, not yet. The weight of it felt too big for a single moment. Elias lingered by the door, his eyes softening. I'll check in on you two. For what it's worth, I'm glad you saved him. Maybe this time, things will be different. He turned and disappeared into the drizzle, the old Chevy rumbling to life and fading down the gravel road. Rowan watched him go, then turned to Hollow, heart pounding with a mix of fear and determination. He ran his hand over the envelope, not ready to break the seal. The barn felt smaller now, but the world outside seemed suddenly larger, a map of possibilities and threats. Hollow nuzzled Rowan's shoulder, as if to say, we made it this far? What's next? Rowan knelt, pressing his forehead gently against the stallion's. You weren't born to win trophies, boy. You were born to prove a point. I get it now. I won't let them erase you again. Thunder rumbled in the distance, the storm lingering over the mountains. Rowan stood and tucked the envelope into his jacket. There was work to do, repairs, training, feeding. But now there was something more. A reason. As he moved through the barn, Hollow watched him, dark eyes shining with a new kind of light. For the first time, Rowan didn't feel alone in the fight. He felt part of something bigger. A challenge, a legacy, a chance to finish what his uncle started. And outside, beyond the barn, the world waited. Some would scoff, some would fight. But Rowan knew he wasn't just fighting for Hollow now. He was fighting for everyone who'd ever been told they didn't belong. Everyone who'd been written off before they even started. He looked back at the barn, the battered stall, the horse who refused to give up. We're not done yet, he said quietly, and the promise hung in the air long after the rain faded. Days passed, then weeks. The barn weathered another storm. The world outside was cold, hard, sometimes cruel, but inside, Rowan and Hollow were making steady progress, small victories, day by day. Hollow's coat shone a little more with each grooming, muscle returning to his frame, his eyes brighter and watchful. Rowan began to believe the impossible was within reach. But one gray afternoon, as Rowan mucked out the stall and Hollow crunched on a rare treat of crisp apples, an envelope arrived that threatened to shatter everything. The letter came with the day's mail, delivered by Mr. Gibson, who offered a sympathetic look, but no words. Rowan wiped his hands on his jeans and tore it open on the barn's workbench, heart thumping as he recognized the letterhead. A Breed Registry Board of Montana. He read quickly, hope shriveling with each line. Dear Mr. Hale, our records indicate the animal known as Hollow is not recognized within the official breed registry, and therefore not eligible for participation in public exhibitions, showcases, or competitions under current bylaws. We respectfully request that you refrain from any further attempts to enter said animal into registry-sanctioned events. Yours sincerely, Montana Breed Registry Board. Rowan felt the words like a slap. All his work, every ounce of sweat, sacrifice, and late-night hope, dismissed with a cold, formal letter. He crumpled the page, fury flaring in his chest, then smoothed it out again, as if hoping a second reading would offer some loophole, some lifeline. It didn't. That evening, Elias Carter showed up again, drawn by news of the letter. Small towns have their own underground telegraph. He walked into the barn as Rowan sat staring at the paper, Hollow standing quietly nearby. Elias dropped his hat on a hook, hands deep in his pockets. I heard. Registry sent their answer. Rowan's face was set, jaw tight with frustration. They didn't even give him a chance. Just a letter. Like he's nothing. Elias looked at Hollow, then back at Rowan, his expression pained but honest. Son, I warned you. That board, those people, they don't care about what a horse can do, only what's on the paper. They make the rules, and they sure as hell won't break them for a boy and a blacklisted horse. Rowan's anger boiled over. He slapped the letter on the workbench. It's not fair. He survived things no show horse could even imagine. Doesn't that matter? Elias leaned against the stall door, folding his arms. In the real world, it matters more than anything, but to them, it's all bloodlines and bureaucracy. For a moment, the barn was silent except for the steady sound of Hollow's breathing and the wind rattling loose boards. Rowan looked at the registry's form again. His hands shook, but not from fear. He stood, grabbing a rusted coffee can from the shelf. He struck a match, hesitated just long enough for Elias to frown in warning, then touched the flame to the edge of the letter. The paper curled, blackened, shriveling to ash. Rowan watched every word burn. The ashes tumbled into the bottom of the can, and the last line to disappear was, Yours sincerely. They buried him once, Rowan said quietly, almost to himself. I won't let them do it again. Elias watched, the beginnings of a grin playing on his lips. That's a dangerous move, kid. Burning their rules won't change the world. Rowan shrugged, a new determination settling in his eyes. Maybe not. But I'm not living by their world anymore. For the next few days, Rowan was a man possessed. He poured his energy into Hollow, feeding, exercising, training, and dreaming up new ways to defy the system. He remembered his uncle's old stories about horses that won races no one thought they'd finish. The champions that came from nowhere. It wasn't about trophies anymore. It was about justice, about grit, about proving to everyone, himself included, that worth was something deeper than a piece of paper. But the town noticed. Kids started coming to watch. Some folks whispered behind Rowan's back, calling him stubborn or foolish. Others began to offer quiet encouragement. Mrs. Wesson gave him an extra sack of feed on credit and muttered, Don't make me regret this, Hale. Even Daniels, the cranky neighbor, stopped by once and tossed Rowan a nod of respect, which was about as close to a compliment as you could get in their part of Montana. Still, there were reminders of what he was up against. One afternoon, a shiny horse trailer rolled through town, polished chrome, registry banners, fancy folks in pressed jeans. Their laughter echoed as they passed Rowan leading Hollow along the road. "Looks like the charity case is still at it," someone jeered. Rowan ignored them. Hollow didn't flinch. If anything, the stallion held his head a little higher, his step a little stronger. That night, Rowan couldn't sleep. He lay on his cot in the barn, watching the moonlight spill through the cracks. He replayed every moment: the auction, the first night home, the endless miles, the letter. He thought of his uncle, of all the times Walt told him to fight for what he believed in. He rose quietly, grabbing his uncle's letter from under his pillow, but still not opening it. Instead, he slipped outside. The night was cold and silent. The world stretched wide under a sky full of stars. Rowan looked up and spoke softly, as if to the ghosts of every outcast and underdog who ever lived. "If they won't make room for us, we'll make our own space." Hollow's story doesn't end in a file cabinet. It ends when he's shown everyone what heart can do. In the morning, Elias returned with news. "Granite Valley exhibition is next month," he said. "Biggest horse event in the county. If you're really set on proving your point, that's where you do it." Rowan's eyes lit up. "I don't need their blessing to show up, do I?" Elias shook his head. "Anyone can walk through the gate. But competing? That's another story." Rowan grinned, defiant. "I'm not here to compete. I'm here to be seen." That night, with the ashes of the registry's letter still in the old coffee can, Rowan began planning his next move. He knew the risk. He knew the odds. But he also knew something else. Sometimes, the only way to break the rules is to burn them down and build something new from the ashes. Hollow stood beside him, calm and strong, as if he understood the challenge ahead. Rowan stroked the horse's muzzle and whispered, "They can't erase you. Not anymore." As the days grew longer and the thaw of spring crept into the fields, Rowan and Hollow trained beneath open skies. Each day they grew stronger, a little braver, and in the hearts of those who watched from a distance, something was changing too. A sense that maybe, just maybe, this time the underdog might really have a chance. The calendar turned, and with each new day, the air felt lighter, the mud thawed, and winter's grip on the Montana countryside loosened. Spring brought restless winds, wildflower blooms along the ditches, and a buzz of anticipation Rowan hadn't felt in years. Talk of the Granite Valley Equine Exhibition swirled around every feed store, cafe, and gas station. And it was more than an event. It was a proving ground, a place where ranchers, breeders, and trainers brought their best to shine under the gaze of everyone who mattered. Rowan listened to the rumors, pieced together the rules from old flyers tacked to corkboards, and watched as the locals grew swept up in a familiar fever. This year, though, there was a new kind of whisper. Folks wondered if the stubborn boy with a black stallion would really show up. For Rowan, the decision had been made the night he burned the registry letter. There would be no backing down. He spent the weeks leading up to Granite Valley in a flurry of preparation. The barn got a fresh coat of paint, well, as fresh as half-used cans from the dump would allow. He cleaned every inch of Hollow's stall, laid fresh straw, patched up the paddock fence, and built a crude but sturdy practice arena out back. Most of his days were spent with Hollow. He started each morning before dawn, leading the stallion out into the mist. Rowan rode bareback at first. Hollow needed to build muscle, to learn trust, to remember what it felt like to move with purpose. The two of them worked quietly, speaking more with gesture than with words. Rowan learned to read Hollow's moods in the flick of an ear or the soft snort of approval. He watched the stallion's stride lengthen, his breathing steady, his glossy black coat catching the sun, but training was about more than strength. Rowan knew Granite Valley would be full of the best, the fastest, the most obedient, the most beautiful horses, all polished and paraded by owners with deep pockets. He wouldn't match them with money, but he could match them with grit and heart. Elias dropped by often, offering advice and stories from years past. Some days he'd critique Rowan's posture, his reins, his seat in the saddle. Other times, he'd just stand at the fence and nod, pride glinting in his weathered eyes. You ready for the big time, kid?" Elias asked one afternoon, watching Rowan guide Hollow through a tight circle at a trot. Rowan grinned, breathless. "As ready as I'll ever be," Elias chuckled. "That arena is their cathedral. They don't like outsiders stepping on their altar." Rowan patted Hollow's neck, his voice steady. "Then it's time someone knocked on the door." As the exhibition drew closer, the preparations around Granite Valley ramped up. Rows of white tents popped up in the county fairgrounds. Trailers gleamed in the sun, and signs with bold letters announced, "Welcome to Granite Valley, the heart of Montana horse country." Rowan watched the spectacle with a strange mix of excitement and nerves. He couldn't afford a trailer, so he made a plan. He'd walk Hollow the 5 miles to the event grounds, just as they'd walked away from the auction pen weeks before. He scrubbed Hollow's coat until it shone, braided his mane, and mended the old leather bridle one more time. Rowan cleaned up too, borrowing a shirt from Elias that was only a little too big and pulling on his least tattered jeans. The morning of the exhibition dawned bright and cloudless. Rowan woke before sunrise, nerves buzzing in his chest. He led Hollow out of the barn, heart pounding as he locked the door behind him. Along the way, neighbors watched from their porches. Some waved, a few offered quiet encouragement. "Go get 'em, Rowan," shouted Mrs. Wesson from her yard, flour dusting her apron. Daniels, the old skeptic, just nodded, his arms folded tight, a hint of a grin on his lips. As they drew closer to Granite Valley, the sounds of the event grew, a rising clamor of voices, the ring of hammers on tent stakes, the occasional whinny or snort from a horse far more expensive than Hollow. Rowan kept his head up, the lead rope loose in his hand, and Hollow walked beside him with a calm, measured confidence. They arrived at the entrance just as the crowd was beginning to swell. Rows of gleaming trailers lined the field, and everywhere Rowan looked, people in embroidered shirts and polished boots hustled about, checking schedules, brushing manes, snapping photos for social media. Compared to all this, Rowan and Hollow looked like ghosts from another time. Dusty, unpolished, but unbreakable. A few people turned to stare. One man in a pressed vest whispered, "Isn't that the horse from the auction?" Another, a teenage girl in designer riding gear, eyed Hollow's scars and muttered, "Should have stayed at home." Rowan ignored them, his focus unshakable. He registered at the information tent, his name barely raising an eyebrow from the bored volunteer. "You're not on the competitor list, but exhibition laps start at noon," she said. "You'll be called for warm-ups." She handed him a paper wristband and waved him on. Elias caught up to Rowan a few minutes later, out of breath but grinning. "I made it. Didn't think I'd let you walk into the lion's den alone, did you?" Rowan laughed, tension draining from his shoulders. "Glad you're here." They found a quiet patch of grass at the edge of the grounds. Rowan knelt and checked Hollow's hooves, adjusting the homemade saddle pad. The arena gates loomed in the distance, bright metal, surrounded by rows of bleachers already filling with townsfolk, judges, and competitors. The energy in the air was electric. Rowan could feel it, a charge that ran up his spine and made his hands tremble, not with fear, but with anticipation. He caught sight of the registry officials in their official jackets, clipboards in hand, eyes sharp as hawks. Elias nudged him. "Just remember, they're not here to make it easy. But you're not here to make it easy for them either." Rowan smiled. "We'll show them, one way or another." The loudspeakers crackled to life, announcing the first set of warm-ups. One by one, riders and horses paraded into the arena. Each pair met with applause, cheers, and the occasional snap of a camera. Rowan watched, studying their form, their polish, and their confidence. Finally, a volunteer approached with a clipboard. "Rowan Hale, you're up in 5. Rowan led Hollow to the gate. He could feel every eye on him as he waited his turn, the silence heavy. He took a breath, ran his hand down Hollow's neck, and whispered, "Whatever happens in there, we walk out together. That's all that matters." Hollow flicked his ears, calm and ready. The gates opened, and together, Rowan and Hollow stepped forward into Granite Valley, into the arena, into the history of the forgotten, and into a fight for recognition that would echo far beyond those metal gates. The air inside Granite Valley's arena was electric, humming with anticipation. Beneath a towering sky of cobalt blue and dazzling sun, crowds filled the bleachers, the sound of laughter and conversation blending with the soft whinnies and stomping of nervous horses. All around the ring, banners snapped in the wind, sponsors' names bright against the metal fences. The smell was thick with hay, sweat, and the tang of old leather. Rowan's heart hammered as he led Hollow through the side entrance. The crowd's eyes flicked toward him. A young man in worn jeans, leading a black stallion scarred and still half wild but upright and proud. Most didn't recognize him, but a few did, and the whispers started almost at once. "That's the kid from the auction, isn't it? Is that the horse they said was dying? No way they let him in. He's not even registered." Rowan felt every word, every stare, but he kept his gaze ahead, shoulders squared. Hollow walked beside him, steps steady, head high. He was a different horse than he'd been those weeks ago, a horse who had clawed his way back from the edge, carrying scars as proof of survival, not shame. The announcer's voice boomed over the PA system. Next up in the exhibition warm-up, Rowan Hale and his horse, Hollow. Elias joined Rowan just outside the ring, giving him a final look of encouragement. "Remember, they don't expect you to belong here, but you do. Show them why." Rowan nodded, squeezing Elias's shoulder. He led Hollow through the gate and into the ring, the world narrowing to the circle of bright dirt, the fence, and the rows of faces watching. Some clapped politely, others watched with skeptical frown, and a few, mostly older ranchers in battered hats, watched with a glint of hope. He mounted Hollow, settling lightly into the saddle. The stallion tossed his head, as if feeling the moment. Rowan patted his neck, took a deep breath, and nudged him into a walk. The exhibition lap was meant to be simple. Just a warm-up, a chance for the horses and riders to loosen up, to be seen and evaluated by the judges who sat at a long table along one side of the ring. Rowan guided Hollow along the outer rail, feeling the eyes of the judges as they scanned the paperwork on their clipboards. Halfway through the first lap, Rowan felt the tension ripple through the crowd. One of the judges, an older man with a sharp mustache and an even sharper glare, raised his hand signaling for the lap to halt. The announcer's voice broke the silence. "Hold, please. Rowan Hale, can you approach the judge's stand?" Rowan hesitated, but nudged Hollow forward. The horse's ears flicked nervously, but didn't falter. Rowan reined him in just before the table, looking straight at the judges. He could feel his pulse in his ears. The head judge cleared his throat, his voice cold and formal. "Mr. Hale, according to our records, neither you nor your horse appear on the official registry. This event is for registered animals only. As such, you cannot participate in the exhibition." A hush fell over the arena. The crowd's murmurs surged, a blend of confusion, irritation, and curiosity. Rowan's fists tightened on the reins. He glanced around, saw the smirks from a group of competitors in matching uniforms, saw the worried faces of a few neighbors, saw Elias at the edge of the ring, jaw set in defiant support. Rowan could have left quietly, could have turned Hollow around and walked out with his head down, but something in him snapped. The same stubbornness that had kept Hollow alive, the same grit that had dragged them through frost and ridicule. He guided Hollow closer to the judge's table, found the nearest microphone, and leaned in, voice carrying over the silent arena. With all due respect, sir, my horse survived what none of you could imagine. He was thrown away, starved, abandoned, and left for dead, and yet here he stands, strong, proud, alive. If that disqualifies him, then maybe your rules are the problem, not him." For a moment the arena held its breath. The judges exchanged glances, flustered, and clearly not expecting such a public challenge. The head judge tried to keep his composure, but his cheeks reddened. This is not a matter of sentiment, Mr. Hale. We have rules for a reason." Rowan didn't back down. "Your rules were made to keep horses like Hollow out, to keep people like me out. But I'm here, and so is he. All I'm asking is for one chance, one lap. Let the people see for themselves." There was a tension in the air now, a crackle of something bigger than any horse show. The crowd started to shift. First murmurs, then a few shouts of support. "Let him ride!" someone yelled from the stands. Others joined in. Elias stepped to the fence, calling out, "This isn't about rules, it's about heart." The judges conferred, voices low and urgent. The announcer, caught in the middle, finally picked up the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, in the spirit of sportsmanship, and at the urging of the crowd, the judges have agreed to allow Mr. Hale and Hollow one exhibition lap. This will not be judged for competition, but for demonstration only." A cheer rose from the bleachers. Unexpected and raw, Rowan felt his breath hitch. He looked down at Hollow, who seemed to sense the moment. Ears forward, body coiled, ready. Rowan nodded his thanks to the judges, then turned back toward the open arena. He caught Elias's eye. The old man's face was wet with tears he didn't bother to hide. Rowan felt his own vision blur for a second, but he blinked it away. He leaned forward, whispering into Hollow's ear, "It's just us now, buddy. One silent circle. Show them what it means to be unbroken." Rowan straightened in the saddle, raised his chin, and with all the dignity he could muster, urged Hollow forward, toward the next moment, and whatever waited on the other side of the circle. The crowd quieted to an almost reverent hush as Rowan guided Hollow away from the judges' table and back toward the heart of the arena. For a moment, the world seemed to shrink to just the two of them. A battered young man on a black horse who had no business being here, surrounded by people who had never once thought he'd make it this far. The banners barely fluttered now. The wind dropped. The noise fell away. Every eye in the arena fixed on the unlikely pair about to write their own small piece of history. Rowan sat up straight, his hands steady on the reins. He pressed his knees gently into Hollow's sides, feeling the horse's muscles tense and gather beneath him. There was no music, no fancy choreography, none of the glitz and pageantry of the scheduled competitors. This was a lap without scorecards, without trophies. Just the raw, whole, unfiltered truth of survival. Rowan's mind drifted to every moment that had brought them here. The frostbitten miles, the endless whispers, the hard nights in a half-collapsed barn. He thought of his uncle's voice, remembered Elias's warnings, remembered Hollow's first weak snort of defiance on that freezing night. Now, every doubt, every bruise, every sacrifice seemed to surge in his chest and radiate outward. He gave Hollow the lightest cue. The stallion stepped forward, ears pricked, eyes blazing. The first few strides were slow, measured, almost uncertain. But Rowan didn't rush him. He let Hollow find his own rhythm, let the horse decide the pace, as if both of them knew this was about more than just proving a point. This was about honoring the journey. As they circled the arena, the silence became a character all its own. There was only the sound of hooves on packed dirt, steady, rhythmic, echoing up into the metal rafters. People in the crowd leaned forward, drawn in by the stillness. Some shifted in their seats, unsure of what to make of this simple, unadorned performance. A few of the kids who'd watched Rowan train in the fields pressed to the fence, their faces bright with awe. Rowan felt Hollow's confidence grow with each stride. The stallion's neck arched, his tail lifted. He began to move not as a survivor, but as a champion, each step powerful, proud, and precise. For a moment, Rowan forgot about the registry, the rules, the snide remarks, and the mountain of odds stacked against them. All that mattered was the partnership forged from adversity, the deep understanding between horse and rider that needed no words. As they rounded the far turn, Rowan glanced up at the judges. He saw skepticism, but also curiosity. Some judges leaned in, pens poised, but none wrote anything down. The lead judge's eyes narrowed, studying every line of Hollow's body, every movement of Rowan's hands. When they passed the bleachers, Rowan caught sight of Elias, standing tall, his hands gripping the top rail. The old man's eyes glistened with pride. Nearby, Mrs. Wesson waved a handkerchief, her face red with emotion. Even Daniels, the most stubborn old rancher in town, stood without his usual scowl, hat in hand. Rowan straightened in the saddle. He closed his eyes for a second, letting the sounds and the smells of the arena wash over him. He thought about what to say to Hollow, but realized words weren't needed. All the encouragement, all the gratitude was in the way he sat, in the quiet trust he gave. Halfway through the lap, a dog barked from the stands, a sharp, jarring sound. Hollow flicked his ears, startled, but Rowan stayed calm. He leaned forward, whispering, "Easy, boy. You're safe." Hollow settled. The connection between them, unbreakable. They continued, the crowd so quiet that Rowan could hear his own heartbeat. A young girl by the rail gasped in awe as Hollow passed, her mother putting an arm around her shoulders, whispering something Rowan couldn't hear. An older man, face lined by years of work, took off his hat in silent respect. Rowan and Hollow completed the circle at a walk, then a trot, and finally, just for a handful of strides, a canter. The stallion's mane streamed in the breeze, his legs powerful, his movement fluid and free. There was nothing showy in the way they moved, but something about the honesty of it was impossible to ignore. When they reached the starting point, Rowan slowed Hollow to a walk and then a halt, pausing in the very center of the arena. He let the silence linger for a moment longer, his eyes sweeping over the crowd, then down to his horse. He patted Hollow's neck, his voice low but clear. "You did it, buddy. You showed them all." For a heartbeat, nothing happened. The arena remained suspended in a hush. Then, from the back of the stands, someone began to clap. Slow, hesitant at first, like a single drop of rain before the storm. Another person joined in, then another. The applause grew, rolling across the bleachers in waves, until the entire arena thundered with it. People rose to their feet, cheering and whistling. Even the judges sat back, stunned by the moment they had witnessed. Rowan felt tears prick his eyes. He ducked his head, hiding his emotion in Hollow's mane. The applause wasn't for medals or papers. It was for defiance, for resilience, for the unbreakable bond between an outcast and the one who wouldn't let him fall. Elias met Rowan at the gate, voice choked with emotion. "You did more than ride a lap, kid. You changed something in this town today." Rowan slid down from Hollow, legs trembling. He hugged Elias, laughing through tears. Mrs. Wesson pushed her way forward, pressing a folded note of congratulations into Rowan's palm. Daniel slapped him on the back. The children from the fence rushed up, wanting to pet Hollow, wide-eyed and grinning. Through it all, Hollow stood calm, regal, accepting every touch, every cheer. He had found his place, not in the records or the trophies, but in the hearts of everyone who witnessed his silent circle. Rowan looked up at the grandstand one last time, feeling the weight of the journey lift. No registry, no judge, no rule could erase what they'd just done. As the sun broke through the clouds and bathed the arena in golden light, Rowan whispered to Hollow, "We're not invisible anymore." And in that moment, with the world watching, they both knew it was true. The sun was setting by the time Rowan and Hollow left Granite Valley, the air sweet with hay and celebration. People called after them, slapping Rowan on the back, children darting forward to stroke Hollow's neck as if he were some legendary steed. For the first time, Rowan felt a true sense of belonging, not to a club or a registry, but to a community changed by what they'd witnessed. He had expected scorn, or at best indifference, but the ovation, the tears in old Elias's eyes, and the whispered, "Thank you for showing us what matters," felt like a warm tide that washed away years of loneliness. They made the walk home together, Hollow stepping proudly alongside Rowan, each stride carrying new weight, no longer an outcast, but a survivor who had shown everyone his heart. As the last hints of daylight faded and stars blinked awake over the Montana plains, Rowan opened the barn doors and led Hollow inside. The barn felt different now, as if the cheers and hope of the arena had somehow followed them, lingering in the straw and shadows. Elias was already waiting there, a lantern glowing softly on the workbench. He sat in his usual spot, cap in his lap, a gentle smile on his lips. "Never thought I'd see the day," he said as Rowan entered, "when folks would clap louder for a horse with no papers than for all the blue ribbons put together." Rowan laughed, his exhaustion softened by joy. He fed Hollow, checked his hooves, then flopped down on a hay bale, still in his dusty show clothes. For a long moment, they simply sat in the warmth and silence, sharing the peace that comes after a long, hard battle. Elias finally reached into his coat and pulled out the weathered envelope, the letter Rowan's uncle had written years ago, hidden under floorboards, waiting for the right time. Elias, you were too young to understand back when I found this. But after today, I think you're ready. Rowan took the envelope with trembling hands. The paper was soft with age. The ink faded, but still legible. He turned it over, seeing his name in his uncle's familiar scrawl. For a second, he hesitated. Then he broke the seal and unfolded the letter. He read aloud, voice shaking at first, then growing steadier. Rowan, if you're reading this, I guess I'm gone. Maybe things turned out okay. Maybe not. I bred Hollow not to win trophies, but to show people what a real horse could be. Even when they say you don't belong. The world likes its lines and boxes. Sometimes, though, you have to draw your own. If Hollow found someone willing to stand with him, someone who saw his worth, not just his scars, then maybe all this mattered after all. Never let anyone else tell you who you are, or what you can't do. And remember, it's never about papers or applause. It's about heart. I'm proud of you, kid. Walt. Rowan finished reading and sat for a long time, letting the words soak into him. Tears pricked his eyes, and he didn't try to hide them. Elias sat in silence, letting Rowan process the letter in his own way. He folded the paper carefully, hands shaking a little, and tucked it back into the envelope. The barn was dim now, lit only by the glow of the old lantern and the soft moonlight filtering through the gaps in the boards. Rowan got up and moved to Hollow's side, pressing his forehead gently against the stallion's. Hollow closed his eyes and rested his heavy head against Rowan's chest. For a moment the two stood there, lost in a silence filled with gratitude and understanding. Elias spoke up, voice low and full of memory. Your uncle would be proud, not just for what you did in that arena, but for not letting them break you or Hollow. Rowan nodded, feeling the truth of it. I wish he could have seen it. I wish he'd known it was worth it. Elias placed a hand on Rowan's shoulder. He knew, kid. That's why he left you that letter. He believed in you, even when you didn't believe in yourself. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the old weather vane. Rowan stepped out into the yard, lantern in hand, and looked up at the sky. The stars were bright, scattered across the darkness like 1,000 promises. He took a deep breath, the chill air filling his lungs, then walked back inside, setting the lantern on the workbench beside the letter. He sat down, the barn quiet, except for Hollow's gentle breaths. The journey replayed in his mind. Every obstacle, every insult, every night he'd wondered if hope was just a fool's game. Now the answer was clear in the horse beside him, in the town's changed hearts, in the words his uncle had left behind. Rowan spent a long time that night sitting with Hollow, watching the lantern's glow, flicker, and fade. At some point, he felt the stallion's head settle against his arm, warm and heavy. Rowan smiled, eyes closing, and whispered, "We did it, boy. We really did it." In that old barn, surrounded by shadows and the quiet heartbeat of a friend, Rowan understood that victory wasn't a ribbon or a trophy or even the roar of applause. It was this, having someone to fight for, and knowing you'd never truly be forgotten. As the lantern burned low, Rowan made a promise to himself and to Hollow. They would carry the story forward, a testament to everyone who'd ever been cast aside. For every forgotten horse, every overlooked dreamer, every kid with more heart than money, their circle would grow wider. And it would all begin with a single, stubborn lap in the face of impossible odds. The morning after the Granite Valley exhibition, the little barn at the edge of Rowan's land was filled with an energy he had never felt before. It wasn't just pride or relief. It was possibility. The wind outside had changed, sweeping the scent of spring grass through the cracks, and sunlight beamed across the dirt floor as if the whole world was waking up to something new. Word of Hollow's silent circle had spread like wildfire. By midday, Neighbors Rowan hardly knew came by with congratulations, fresh-baked bread, and most important of all, help. Daniels, the old skeptic, brought over his truck and a load of second-hand lumber. Mrs. Wesson arrived with her grandkids and a box of paintbrushes, announcing, "If we're going to have a champion horse in this town, he deserves a champion's barn." At first, Rowan didn't know how to accept it. He had spent so long fighting alone that the thought of others pitching in felt unreal, almost embarrassing. But as he watched the community gather, kids laughing, Elias giving instructions, folks nailing up new boards and mending old stalls, he realized this was part of the miracle too. Maybe winning wasn't about trophies, but about the hands that showed up when you needed them. He threw himself into the work with everyone else, sanding splinters and swinging a hammer, getting as dirty as he'd ever been. Hollow watched from his favorite corner, calm and content, his black coat shining in the afternoon sun. Whenever the work paused, someone would wander over to feed him a treat or gently stroke his nose. Even the kids who'd once been afraid of him now called out his name, their laughter echoing through the barn. By week's end, the transformation was complete. The barn gleamed with fresh paint, the fences stood straight and tall, and Hollow's stall looked fit for royalty. Rowan hung his uncle's old halter above the doorway, a quiet tribute to the man who started it all. The place didn't just look different. It felt different. It was alive with hope, but the changes didn't stop there. News of Hollow's story traveled far beyond the county lines. The local newspaper wrote a feature called "The Underdog Who Changed Granite Valley." And before long, people from neighboring towns showed up, curious to meet the black stallion who had defied the odds. Some came just to watch him in the paddock. Others asked Rowan to tell the story again and again. Each time, he saw their eyes light up with wonder, as if some part of them believed they could do the impossible too. On Saturdays, Rowan started opening the barn to visitors. Kids came in groups, their boots clomping on the new floorboards, eyes wide as they circled Hollow's pen. Some brought apples, some just came to listen. Rowan found himself telling the story, not just of Hollow, but of his Uncle Walt, of long nights and stubborn dreams. He spoke of failure and fear, but also of grit, forgiveness, and the kind of hope that comes only when you've been told no 1,000 times. The town rallied around them, naming the project the Hollow Project. It wasn't official, not in the way the Registry would ever recognize, but it meant more than any certificate ever could. Parents volunteered to help with chores. Retired carpenters fixed up the tack room, and local artists offered to paint a mural. One crisp morning, Rowan watched as a team of teenagers sketched the outline of a black horse beneath stormy clouds on the wall of the old feed store. When it was done, Hollow's eyes glowed bright as embers, and across the bottom in bold letters it read, "Heart over papers." Every so often, Rowan would check the mailbox for a letter from the breed registry board, but nothing ever came, not a single word, not even an apology or acknowledgement. At first that bothered him. Then he realized it didn't matter anymore. The world that had written him and Hollow off was shrinking, while their own world was growing, rebuilt one kind word, an act of courage at a time. Late one evening, after the last visitor had gone, Rowan stood alone in the barn, looking over the changes. Hollow dozed peacefully in his stall, the lamplight turning his coat to silver. Rowan took out his uncle's letter, reading it once more, letting the words settle into his heart. He remembered the night he'd almost given up, the weight of being told no, the sting of thinking you weren't enough. He remembered what it meant to stand with someone, even when no one else would. He knelt by Hollow's stall, running a gentle hand along the stallion's neck. "We did it, boy," he whispered. "Not just the circle or the barn, but all of it. You proved them wrong, and you proved me wrong too, about what's possible when you refuse to quit." Outside, the moon rose high, casting the whole valley in pale, hopeful light. Rowan stood and opened the barn door, letting the breeze wash in, filled with the scents of fresh hay and wildflowers. He turned back for one last look, feeling a peace he'd never known before. This was his legacy, not a shelf of trophies, but a barn full of laughter, a horse who'd outlived every expectation, a community drawn together by the courage to believe in more. A few days later, the whole town gathered for the mural's unveiling. The mayor gave a little speech, but what Rowan remembered most was the line that everyone seemed to carry away. They judged him by papers. We judged him by heart. Heart won. As people drifted away, Rowan stayed behind, staring at the mural, at Hollow's eyes, bold and alive against the painted storm. Kids played in the grass, volunteers swapped stories, and above it all, the wind carried the echo of hooves that had once been silent. Rowan smiled, thinking of his uncle, of Elias, of every underdog who ever dared to ride again. He knew that what they had built here, together, would outlast any rule or registry. It would live on in every visitor, every child, every broken thing that found a reason to keep going. Legacy, Rowan realized, wasn't about the trophies. It was about the truth, about the circle you draw in the dirt, the stories you leave behind, and the way a broken horse and a forgotten man could remind an entire town what real grit means. As dusk fell, Rowan raised his hand in silent salute to Hollow and the long road behind them. Then he turned, ready to welcome whoever might need a place to start again.